This story takes place in St. Louis during the summer of 2016. There was this weird clown fiasco going on in America back then. There were random sightings of people dressed as clowns and holding knives, most of them being just for scares. However, when a trend like this happens, it can and will bring out people who are truly disturbed. The details are a bit foggy for me. Not only did this happen some time ago, but I still have trauma from this event. That night, my friend Max and I wanted to go urban exploring at the site of an abandoned cement factory just north of the city. Max was 160 pounds, about 5'10", and I'm a 5'5" female and was around 140 pounds at the time. This particular area in St. Louis is called Cement Land. Think of it as an incomplete adult playground, made from the remains of the factory. The creator died halfway through its construction, leaving the place only half built. It now sits crumbling and abandoned. Cement Land is incredibly easy to access, and once you're inside, it is a huge place full of twists, turns, and multiple structures to explore. Truly a dream come true for a person like me. This night was not my first rodeo. However, this would be the last time I was there. I remember climbing the ladder to one of the tallest buildings on site. Max had gone up first. The ladder led to different levels until you got to the top. We were heading to the 5th level when we saw someone at the end of the hallway. This person was very large, extremely tall, wearing a frowning clown mask, and held what looked like a plank of wood in his hand. Max was the first to see him. He started calling out to him, thinking it was a prank. "Hey buddy, nice costume. You know Halloween isn't for like 3 more months, right?" Max started throwing clumps of dirt in his direction and laughing like a moron. The figure just stood there, as still as a statue, staring at us. He seemed to be glaring at me in particular. Those old paintings of frowning clowns always creeped me out, but seeing one in real life, in an abandoned building, caused a very unsettling feeling to grow in the pit of my stomach. After a few minutes of the figure just staring at us, I could tell that even Max was starting to get concerned. "I don't have a good feeling about this. Let's just get the hell out of here, Max." "Yeah, me either. Let's go." We turned away and made it about halfway back down the hallway when we heard someone say in the deepest voice I've ever heard, "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" We looked back to see the figure now sprinting directly towards us. We ran as fast as we could to the ladder. Max made it there first, practically jumping down to the next floor. As I began quickly making my way down the ladder, I felt a hand grab the back of my head, then started pulling. I was able to grab the side of the ladder and pull myself out of the clown's grip, but it cost me some hair in the process. I ended up sliding 3 floors down to the 2nd story. If I hadn't been wearing a pair of Easton batting gloves, there wouldn't have been any skin left on my palms. My landing was rough, and I completely blacked out. My memory gets fuzzy from this point. Not only was my head in a world of pain, but I also felt a shooting pain up my thigh. I do remember stumbling out of the building, with Max practically dragging me. I remember seeing blood running down my leg. I also saw the frowning clown one last time, looking through a window on the 5th floor. That's an image burned into my head, forever. The next thing I know, we're in the car, on the way home. I guess when I jumped off the ladder, I ended up landing on a hefty piece of metal, which left a decent-sized wound in my thigh. If it wasn't for the adrenaline, I probably would have had to wait for an ambulance to get me out of there. I ended up at the hospital with 23 stitches and a big bill to go with it. To this day, I have never returned to Cement Land. Who knows what that man would have done to me if he had caught me alone, or what he would have done to Max if he had tried to fight him. Every time I see that scar on my leg, I'm reminded of the most terrifying night of my life. This is something that happened to me 14 years ago, but still thinking about it now gives me the chills. I used to live in a small town in Missouri with my mother and my stepfather. Our house was a few miles outside of town, along an old state highway. We were pretty isolated out there, other than the occasional passing car or trucks carrying farm equipment. One day, I came home from a morning shift, and I was pretty tired, so I immediately came through the front door and sprawled out on the couch. My parents were going to go into town to visit a family friend, so I just put on a movie and quickly drifted off to sleep. I must have been out for a couple of hours before I was woken up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I figured my parents had returned from their friend's house, so I just laid there silently, hoping to fall back asleep. After a few minutes of silence, I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Where is everybody?" My eyes shot open, and I looked up to see someone standing over me. I had never seen this man before. He was tall and muscular, wearing a white t-shirt with cut-off sleeves. He was also covered head to toe in blood. I jumped to my feet instantly. I had never been so scared before in my life. Trying to rationalize, I asked, "Are you looking for my parents?" I know it sounds like a stupid question to ask, but I was still a bit disoriented. He stared at me for a moment before asking, "Who are you?" "Who are you? What the fuck are you doing in my house?" I replied. He stared at me blankly. I thought I was going to be murdered. He kept babbling incoherently and asking where everyone was. I had no idea what he was referring to. After about 5 minutes, I realized that the blood that was all over his clothes and face was his own. I glanced out the living room window toward the highway. It was then that I began to understand. In the drainage ditch in front of my house was a red pickup truck. I told the man to come with me, and we went outside. Soon after we got near the wrecked truck, another vehicle pulled up. Apparently, the man had been driving drunk and had driven his truck into the ditch. He was intoxicated and had a concussion from the impact. He was so messed up that he thought other people were in the truck with him. Thankfully, he had been alone and stumbled into the nearest house looking for help, which happened to be mine. The driver that pulled up drove the man to the hospital. As far as I know, he was okay. In hindsight, I understand the situation, but in the moment, I saw an unknown man, covered in blood, standing over me. That was absolutely terrifying. It was the winter of 2015. I was a single 31-year-old female with a lifetime of experience doing risky things on my own, without consequence. During this time, I was working at a doctor's office in Branson, Missouri. I had just gotten a new iPhone, and I was excited to try out the time-lapse mode on the camera. On my drive home from work one evening, I decided to stop and capture the sunset over Table Rock Lake. It was a gorgeous evening, and the winter sun would be setting soon. I parked my SUV at a state park parking lot. My vehicle was the only one in sight, but I didn't find that to be alarming. I hopped out and quickly realized how incredibly chilly it was. It was sunny, but it was blistering cold. I opened the back of my vehicle and put on some gloves and a better pair of shoes. I then took off down the trail that led to the edge of the lake. I noticed a showboat making its way across the lake for its sunset voyage, and I thought it would be neat to capture it in the time lapse. The path down to the water was marked with large rocks on each side. I was in a hurry to get down to the shore and into recording position. I lost my footing and fell down hard. My head rested on a pointy-shaped big rock that I think would have knocked me out had I not managed to literally stop the impact at the moment we collided. My knee and one of my hands was in a lot of pain. It suddenly hit me how stupid this was, because nobody knew where I was, and I nearly incapacitated myself on a vacant trail, in freezing temperatures, within minutes away of being dark. As I sat there, recovering from my fall, I decided I was close enough to shore. I would just film right here, where I fell. I was about to find out that falling down was the least of my worries. "You got a light?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, and there he was. Standing about 20 feet behind me was a man. Sorry, I don't smoke." "I saw you getting out of your car up there. Couldn't help but notice. You're alone." Where had he been? There wasn't a soul in sight when I parked and headed down the trail. This next part you might find hard to believe, because I myself can't grasp that there are people out there like this. Within less of a minute after his appearance, he asked, "So, do you want to fuck?" I know you've probably heard situations like this 100 times, but think about the circumstances. I had just taken a nasty fall, so running would have been quite painful to do. I likely would have been captured. We were all alone on the trail. Sure, the showboat was still out in the water, but it was several football fields away by that point. No one on board would have seen us, and no one would hear me if I were to scream. I just knew I had to get off this trail before the sun went down. Without missing a beat, I told him that it was too cold to do it outside, and that we should just go to my car, and obviously, I had abandoned capturing the sunset. I don't recall all the things he said during the walk up to the parking lot, but it was about what you would expect. How had I gotten myself into this awful situation? God, this is so stupid. Please, just let me make it out of this, and I swear I'll be smarter in the future. He then placed his hand on the back of my pants for the rest of the walk. Once we got to the parking lot, much to my disappointment, my car was still the only one there. There was another car, but it wasn't parked in a real spot, sort of off to the side, and it hadn't been there earlier. I just knew it was his car. He had been hiding and watching me, and left his car to follow me. You might ask why I didn't call the cops while I was out on the trail. Well, he was watching my every move, and I wanted to make it off the trail unharmed and alive. With the temperatures being below freezing, I figured it was a good excuse to refuse to do what he wanted to do out there on the trail. But making promises to do it elsewhere was the only way I would make it back to my car. Unfortunately, the parking lot was far enough away from the regular highway that passing cars wouldn't see us. The next thing I had to do was make it back to my SUV and escape. He continued going into detail about what he was going to do to me, which is too graphic for me to write about. I was still playing along. I tried to get his name and number out of him, but he refused on both. Why would someone refuse to give their name? We were still by his car. "Let's just do this here." "No, let's go to my car. There's a lot more room in there." Alright, I need to grab something real quick. He then grabbed something out of his car. I never got a good look at it, but I'm pretty sure it was a handgun. We then walked across the parking lot to my car. I pushed the unlock button, knowing that only pushing it once would only unlock the driver's side door. I had my keys ready. I jumped in, and as he was attempting to open the passenger door, I threw it in reverse and backed up as the tires spun on loose gravel. I then put it into drive and floored it. I was too afraid to look back in the rearview mirror. I immediately called 911 and gave them his description. Oddly enough, he was a handsome guy, stood about 6 feet tall, blonde hair, brown eyes, fair skin, a slightly muscular build, and nice features. Not the kind of creep you were probably imagining. He might have been around 25 or 30 years old. You wouldn't look at him and think anything remarkable or otherwise. I was never in a position to see his license plate, but I told the police about his car. It was probably something that you would see in the early 90s, pale blue in color. It reminded me of my great-grandmother's Oldsmobile. After taking down my information, I never heard from anyone regarding my report again. I may not know who he was or what he has done, but what I do know is that I was in the presence of pure evil that night. I heard you were looking for stories from the cesspool called Los Angeles. Unfortunately, we can't choose where we were born, and I have the distinct honor of being born and raised in the city of demons. I could go into the litany of experiences I've had being harassed by drug addicts, chased by gang members, or was almost in the crossfire of a shootout, but I feel like all of you listening have heard stories like this before. They are a sad reality, but it isn't something that really surprises you, right? We've sadly become accustomed to the violence that takes place in the streets of America, especially LA, and no one seems to have the solution to the problem. However, every once in a while, you hear a story that makes you pause and reflect on how fucked up it is. I'd like to think that this is one of those stories. Back in 2012, I worked for a small startup business that operated out of the St. Vincent Jewelry Center in downtown Los Angeles. I was an employee, but I was friends with the guys who founded the company, and I even shared an apartment with them. I didn't own a car at the time, but it usually wasn't an issue for me, because I could carpool with one of my roommates to and from work. That was until they had to attend a meeting in San Francisco. I told them not to worry, and that I would take a taxi to the office while they were away, or would find a ride with someone else. But I ultimately decided to walk to our office space. At the time, I was looking for ways to burn a certain amount of calories each day, and figured I could keep up with my fitness goals and save a trip to the treadmill by simply walking to work while my roommates were gone. The one downside was that the most direct path to the office took you straight through one of the worst areas of Skid Row. So, I would have to make sure to avoid this area. The day of, I walked to work, taking a route that avoided the danger zone. The only thing of note was seeing a homeless man passed out by a dumpster in an alley, a few blocks away from my apartment building. Work went well that day. It was a bit busier than usual with the bosses being gone. It ended up being a 12-hour shift, so by the time we were done, it was around 10 p.m. A co-worker named Kevin and I decided to stop at a bar to finish off the day. This worked out for me because the place we went to was only a few blocks away from my apartment building and would shorten the distance I had to walk. So we drove to the bar, had some drinks, and called it a night. He offered to drive me to my apartment, but I insisted that I would walk the rest of the way. I knew that Kevin lived in Inglewood, so the sooner he left, the better. I don't remember the exact street names, but I knew the way back to my apartment from where I was, and that I wasn't near Skid Row, so I began to make my way down the street. It was uncharacteristically quiet. You could still hear the soundscape of the city in the distance, but the dim lighting and the lack of pedestrians made me feel a bit uneasy. About 5 minutes into the walk, and about 3 minutes from my destination, I passed by the alley where I had seen the homeless man from earlier. It was your typical city alleyway with dumpsters, drain pipes, and loading docks. However, there was somebody by one of the dumpsters with their back turned to me, crouching down. From the looks of it, It appeared to be an adult woman with her hair tied back into a ponytail. As soon as I saw her, I instantly knew something was off. I could hear these strange sounds, like someone was tearing into a steak. I don't know why. Any other day I would have just kept walking, but I was compelled to see what this woman was doing. Maybe she was sick or something. I cautiously approached. As I did, the wet sound grew louder. When it was about 5 yards away, I cleared my throat and asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman finally stopped what she was doing and stood up. She was wearing a pair of jeans and a light blue top. It didn't look like she was homeless. However, she did not turn around. I then heard her spitting something out. Without saying a single word to me, she took off down to the other side of the alley and disappeared. The alley was dark, and I had to use a small light on my keychain to see what the woman had been crouching over beside the dumpster. When I turned on my light, what I saw was the most disgusting and terrifying thing I have ever laid my eyes on. Lying on the ground was the homeless man from earlier, but his face was almost completely gone. It was just a bloody, gaping hole. Lying on his chest was his tongue. I instantly hunched over and vomited. I then ran the rest of the way back to my apartment and immediately told the security guard working in the lobby to call 911. I waited there for the police to show up so I could report what I saw. I never heard of any follow-ups or news reports about this incident, which is super surprising to me because that cannibal attack in Miami was big news around this time. But I guess the crackdown on gang-related violence was more of a priority for the LAPD back then. I had trouble sleeping for quite some time after this incident. The visage of that man's half-eaten face took a while for me to get over, and I still don't know what to make of what I saw in that dark alley. A seemingly normal-looking woman was crouched over a homeless man and was taking a bite out of him. I sometimes regret not seeing her face, so I could have gave the police a more accurate description of the suspect, but sometimes I'm glad she never turned around. Moral of the story? If you can hitch a ride with someone you trust in downtown LA, do it.